2, 1. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Over. This is Stan Tinsley speaking. I'm speaking today with Mr. Cecil Fornish, 7914 Gleason Road, Knoxville, Tennessee, in regard to his World War II experiences. Today is August 14th, 1991. When did you join the service? I've got the heading here.
My first contact with the service was in 1935 in ROTC at the University of Iowa. For 4 years in the University of Iowa, ROTC, having taken the advanced course and accepted the Second Lieutenant's Commission in the United States Army.
Okay. Were you in reserve capacity at that time?
I was a reserve officer at that time, went on active duty under the Thomason Act, competing for a regular Army commission at Fort Snelling, Minnesota in 1939.
I see. And then did you go into the service at that time?
Well, I didn't make regular Army under the Thomason Act, but was spent a year in the Army at that time, and I was then reassigned, I was asked to volunteer either for Panama, Hawaii, or Philippines. And my commanding officer talked me into putting in for the Philippines. So I asked for the Philippines, and I arrived in the Philippines in the summer of 1940.
Summer of 1940. Okay.
I was a 3rd Infantry regiment at Fort Snelling, Minnesota for my first year of service. During that period of time, theoretically, we're supposed to have a lot of classes and so forth. Competition under the Thomason Act, but it didn't work out that way because I guess war clouds started forming over Europe, and they decided to do a little more action than that. And so we went into training more than class work. In fact, I only had one class all the time I was in the 3rd Infantry.
Okay.
We went from Fort Snelling to Camp Jackson, South Carolina in November 1939, where we spent 3 or 4 months there. At that time we got issued the Grand Rifles, replacing old Springfield rifles. And I recall we trained our troops there and went on the range. And most of the people seemed to borrow, but didn't make the required score at that point in time. And from Camp Jackson we went to Fort Benning, then on to Louisiana, and back up to Fort Snelling in the summer of 40. At that time I went to the Philippines.
The training that you went through in the States, what was your opinion then and now as to the quality of it?
Probably it was not very great. I was the 2nd lieutenant. Theoretically, I was supposed to be training somebody else.
Right.
But my background in training was not that great, and consequently, of course, like most other 2nd lieutenants at that point in time, the retraining really came from the non-commissioned officers that you had in the unit.
Right.
They were the old soldiers who knew the ropes and could tell you what needed to be done when you're in the field at that point in time. And so, but there was no formal class training as such. It was basically on-the-job training, what it boiled down to.
So you were to go on where we talking about, you were in the Philippines in 1940.
Yes. And I was assigned to the 45th Infantry Philippine Scouts, an infantry unit, a heavy weapons company. At that point in time, as I wrote home, a troop of Boy Scouts could have taken the Philippines, but they started building the place up and we got quite a bit of equipment before action actually commenced. In my particular unit, Company D Heavy Weapons Company, I was riding a horse, and we had 37 millimeter cannons and heavy machine guns and this type of thing, which we pulled around with a mule. Sometime in I guess the late 40s, must have been the late 40s, they started bringing, we started recognizing the Philippine Division. And Philippine Division, of course, is involved Philippine Scout troops, 45th Infantry, Philippine Scouts, 57th Infantry, Philippine Scouts, 31st Infantry, an American regiment, plus 2 or 3 artillery regiments, 26th Cavalry Regiment. They were all Philippine Scouts. The only American troops as such was the 31st Infantry Regiment.
I see.
We worked, well, at that time, of course, the Philippine Scouts were at half strength. And in the late 40, I guess that'd be late 40, they started bringing the Scouts up to strength by bringing Philippine Army soldiers into Philippine Scouts. And of course, this involved quite a bit of training, a lot of hard work training them. And by that time, we had our parades, eliminating the horses and eliminating the old saber, which we carried. We had, as we retired those things, we had parades. And the training was pretty intense. The Philippine Scouts probably one of the better soldiers in the whole United States Army at that point in time. They were great soldiers who were well disciplined, do anything you ask of them. That's as good a troops that I've ever been around. And of course, when they brought them up to strength, they got quality people there because everybody wanted to be a Filipino scout. We got a lot of qualified people, and they were ready when the war started. In the meantime, I had gone. They had requested volunteers for infantry observers, aerial observers. And I was one of the two people in my infantry regiment that could pass the Air Corps physical at that time. And they took 2 volunteers out of each regiment over there. Most of the regiments which I mentioned, didn't mention the coast artillery regiments, but so they selected 2, and of course I being one of the 2 that could pass, I actually was selected. And we took 90 days training as aerial observers, learning to Morse code and transmission and use of radio and this type of thing. Right. The purpose being to observation of the spot artillery fire, do this kind of thing.
What part of the Philippines now were you in?
That was I was at Clark Field when I was an aerial observer. I was at Fort McKinley. It was 45th Infantry Philippine Scouts, and that is just outside of Manila.
I see. Okay.
And we were transferred from the 2nd Observation Squadron was transferred from Clark Field to Nichols Field in the summer of 1941. And that's where I was when the war started, 1941.
Okay.
Now, by that time, of course, they had brought a couple of squadrons of B-17s over to the Philippines. They brought the 200 Coast Artillery. They brought 2 squadrons of pursuit planes. And they had brought an artillery unit, and they were bringing everything pretty much up to strength. In fact, one of the last meetings that was held with the officers at that point in time, we were told that there were 90 transports due in the Philippines in the next 90 days. There's over 100 transports. Anyway, 90 days with troops and material and planes and everything coming that way. And things didn't really start to arrive. I remember it was about 3 or 4 days before the war started. They had all the officers together in the theater at Nichols Field and said they got a message from I believe it was the War Department, it could have been the State Department, it must have been the War Department, which said, I will never forget, that Crusoe left Tokyo at 2 hours' notice. He comes to the United States with no concrete proposals for peace whatsoever. His mission in the United States is to stall for time. Be on the alert. And that's almost precisely what that message said. So I always said, how in the world did they get caught at Hawaii? Because we started sleeping in the planes and doing all that kind of thing, trying to avoid the very thing that happened in Hawaii. And they should have had that. I would have thought would have had that kind of a message. And my reaction to it was I remember talking to Halo, who was also an observer, friend of mine. I said to him, I thought we were the ones stalling for time. I didn't know the Japanese were. We had been somewhat on the alert because we knew that there had good evidence that the Japanese were overflying the Philippines at that point in time, and we had reason to believe that they had some agents in the Philippines because Well, we went out to fly and spot searchlights and lights of various types to pinpoint and locate and report back where we had seen lights and what appeared to be somebody trying to guide airplanes into certain areas. So it came to the point where, of course, we knew that we felt there was going to be a war, but we assumed we were going to attack the Philippines first. Never occurred to anybody was going to attack Hawaii. But that's pretty much the way it was at the time the war began. I remember being called about, I guess, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and being told to report immediately that the Japanese had just attacked Pearl Harbor, and I couldn't believe it. And I said, "You got to be kidding!" But they convinced me, and of course, I was with. We were in a house just off of Nichols Field at that time, in Manila, and I got the other officers up, and we got our equipment and headed for the squadron. And I think I got back to the house one time after that. So I think
the war came to the Philippines real fast.
Yes, it did. Yeah, of course they started flying down there early on. My first mission was as an aerial observer was interesting. We received order to fly from Nichols Field up to Vigan, which is the northern part of Lingayen Gulf, and see what was going on. West land, go to Rosales, land, refuel, and go to Vigan, and report what was going on up there. And we took off at night and got lost. Because I had a pilot, but I didn't know any better than he did. We got lost. We got back to Manila, and I called the Colonel Brady, who was the Air Force man, Air Corps man there, the intelligence man. Told him what had happened. He said, "All right." He said, "Refuel, take off from Vigan immediately, go to Vigan, report back what's happened, and when you run out of gas, jump." So we took off, and I called my squadron commander at that time, told him the orders we'd got. It was Colonel Brady. Of course, Brady was interesting. I guess somebody might be interested in this at some future time. When I talked with Colonel Brady, he was so concerned about what had happened to our B-17s over there. They had been caught on the ground, and one squadron was practically destroyed. And he said, when this got notice of this war had started, I called Clark Field, told them to have those B-17s loaded with bombs and be prepared to take off on a moment's notice. And I called the general and told them we were ready to fly and let them hit us first. Now, I never asked him who the general was, but I never knew whether it was MacArthur or the Air Force people over there, but I later learned it was MacArthur. The thought apparently being at that time that MacArthur didn't want them to attack the Philippines. He had a lot of stake in the Philippines, and he thought it would deter the Japanese perhaps from attacking the Philippines if we didn't do anything. That's in any event, we went on up to Vigan, and there were the Japanese, a couple of submarines off, as I recall, 3 destroyers, and it appeared as though they were trying to land a few people on north of Lingayen. And we got that information back, and we got back to Clark Field, actually, so we didn't run out of gas. And then, in any event, I was told to stay there, and they'd give me another mission, and we waited around. Of course, all the B-17s were around Clark Field, but the four motors around the B-17s were all burned. and of course, they had raided Clark Field that day, and they caught it just the right time. The pursuit planes had been out all morning long, flying every place, and had just come in, all of them, for some unknown reason, they all came in at one time, and that's when the Japanese hit and caught the pursuit planes on the ground. Some of them took off and got, some of the pilots ran to their planes and got off, but not very many of them. So they got a lot of the pursuit planes and the B-17s on the ground.
The B-17s weren't in embankments or anything?
No, they were scattered around. around the, of course, back sort of under whatever cover they could have there. So, in any event, they called me and told me I was to deliver a message over to Camp Bannatyne on the Air Corps base, and then return to Manila. And so we went to Bannatyne, delivered our message, and headed back for Manila. First, when I could see the Japanese planes were about, and we were flying an O-52, which had been an airplane rejected by the Swedish government, and we called it the flying coffin. And in any event, I let the pilot know that we had some Japanese to our rear off towards Bannatyne, and so we better probably get on down to the ground and see if we can avoid them seeing us. So we did, and we got into Manila, and they had raided us. We were just raiding Nichols Field, and when we came in over Fort McKinley, and the Philippine Division was there at that point in time, and they all opened up on that little O-52 we had. And they hit the motor of the airplane. First thing I knew, a bullet went right between my legs. My impression was that the Japanese had taken the place while I'd been gone. And then the bullet, or more than one, hit the motor, and it stopped. And the pilot, Lieutenant Lang, told me to jump. And I thought, I didn't want to jump down there, all the Japanese are. So I sat there, and he got up and kicked his emergency door open and said, out. So I said, well, I guess I better get out. In any event, we're 13 of us observers, and we decided the only way you could ever get out of that O-52 would be to, because the tail was right up against you, would be to roll over, hang, and drop. So that's, I rolled over, hanging there, looking to make sure we knew where the parachute cord was. And about that time, the wind had started the rotor burning, and the motor started again. The pilot was standing in the door, and I'm standing there. And so I see him. He steps back to the controls. And so I can't pull myself in. So I turn loose, and they all start shooting at me. And, they hit me. Of course, we were quite low by that time. And when I hit the parachute, I don't think I swung more than 2 or 3 times. But they hit me in the airplane and the parachute, and hit me. They went around my back, around the rib, broke a rib. But first the ribs spun me with the parachute, I guess, and hit the ground and landed near that corner from an American soldier, 31st Century soldiers out there. And he was looking for Japanese. He couldn't understand me being white, I guess. In any event, I put my hand behind my back coming down, and I came around the handful button, and I'm like, I should shot me through the heart. Knew it was going to be 2 weeks stand up. And so when I hit the ground, I went down, and he just looked at me. I said, come here and help me get out of this parachute. And he just looked. Finally, a whole bunch of people ran up there. And of course, there's a bad reaction, but I remember him yelling, get the chaplain, get the chaplain. I said, get me a doctor. In any event, I was taken to Fort McKinley Hospital. They did a little operation there, and they sent me downtown Manila, where I was in the hospital until Christmas Eve of 1941. And Christmas Eve 1941, they came in and said that the Japanese were coming into Manila, and that they had a ship out there ready to leave, and anybody could walk, get up, let's go, get aboard the ship. So I could walk, and I got to the ship. My friend, one of my best friends in the military, was also an observer, Al Fagman. He'd been shot down just ahead of me, and he'd lost a testicle, and his penis had been creased, and he was pretty bad. And he'd been shot through the legs and the lip area.
Was he hit by a friendly fire too?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think, although he had he had a fighter on his tail coming in, but they said there's no way that. Didn't shoot him underneath.
Yeah, right.
He didn't shoot him underneath.
Right.
He said he could never figure out why that fire plane didn't go down, because he said his machine gun fire was right on him all the time.
Is that right?
Yeah. In any event, he couldn't get up and walk, so he stayed there. And I went to the ship, and his story is basically that New Year's Eve, 1941, they had an inter-island steamer painted white and put the people who were like tribesmen aboard that ship and notified the Japanese they were going out with this hospital ship and were going to Australia. And he got to Australia. So that's the biggest mistake I ever made, and I said I could walk. I had no idea where we were going, but where we went, they took us over to Corregidor. Just laid the ship off Corregidor for one day while the Japanese were bombing Corregidor. And I remember we got the message out there that we didn't have to worry that we were under protection of Corregidor's anti-aircraft. They weren't doing a very good job because those planes flying over, they didn't have anything to reach them.
Yeah, right. I remember reading about that.
And then, in any event, the next day they put us on a barge and took us over to Lamai Hospital number 1 on Bataan. And I was in there until, I think, early February, when I was released. First time I got back to my unit, had no airplanes. And being an infantry officer, I said, well, I'll stay in the Air Corps unit. I went back to see my former S3 at the 45th Infantry Regiment. He's a General Funk. He was Lieutenant Colonel Funk when I knew him as the S3 of the 45th, and he was Chief Staff of the 2nd Corps. I went back to see him and told him I wanted to go back to the Philippine Scouts. And he said, no, he couldn't send me back to the Philippine Scouts. He didn't have any authority over the Philippine Scouts, but what he wanted me to do was go out to the Philippine Army. I said, General, I didn't come back and go out to the Philippine Army. He said, that was a real ragtag outfit. My description of them, they'd shown them an infield rifle, a paper hat, and a pair of tennis shoes, and a pair of shorts, and go get them. That's basically what it boiled down to. And he insisted that I go out. So, okay, if that's what you want me to do, give me the orders. So he says, you go back to you, the orders will be up there tomorrow. And they were there, and I reported the 31st Infantry Regiment Philippine Army, the 31st Division Philippine Army. And at that point in time, we were located on the Orion was our outpost line. Orion to, can't remember the name. And our last main line of resistance was Orion crossed to on the Manila Bay side. I was on the Manila Bay side, and Orion was our outpost line. And I was at a battalion of the Philippine Army. I was an instructor with Colonel Montgomery McKee. We were a reinforced battalion with self-propelled artillery and company of tanks in support of this area. And Colonel Montgomery McKee was the West Point of Class 27. He was the commander, and I was sort of look after the infantry. And so, of course, it was assumed, a lot of people thought that they would come down. That was the main highway into Bataan. That was the main road, right along Manila Bay. And so we had one company on Manila Bay, and the other two companies across the highway on the front line. And we worked at that for almost until the surrender. I recall we were putting up bamboo stakes and so forth to try to stop any boats coming in from. We were worried about the Manila Bay side as much as anything, and trying to put up different things to stop any boat penetration that we might get. And of course, our front line, we already had our wire out, and had our machine guns laid, hopefully to delay the enemy if they attacked us. And I think we had about as well defended as we could do it with what material we had. And this Colonel McKee tells me that I've got to go up subsector headquarters, or Colonel Irwin was the only colonel in charge of a subsector. He thought I'd be a general, all the others were.
Excuse me. In the Philippine Army, are all the officers Americans and all the troops Filipinos?
No, the Philippine Army was all Filipino. And we were not in the Philippine Army, we were instructors. We had no command for the Philippine Scouts. They're Filipinos, and the officers are American. Most of them are. Now, the Filipinos who went through West Point, that type of thing, they were regular Philippine Scout officers. And we had a few others that were regular Philippine Scout officers who never left the Philippines. They stayed there. That was their permanent assignment. But generally speaking, all the other officers were American officers. Charge
Okay.
Philippine
Okay.
Scouts. Philippine Army, though, was completely different.
Okay.
Anyway, Colonel McKee told me to go up to, I had to go up to Subsector headquarters and straighten that outfit out up there. That he'd been down to the front lines and it was a mess. And I said, Colonel, I can't do that. I said, I'm a captain. And he's the colonel up there. He said, I'm telling him you're coming. And that you're going to go up there and help straighten this thing out. So I went up there, just before they finally broke through. And I went down and checked out their positions, and it was pathetic. They had a lot of wire, didn't know what to do with it. And of course, back then at least, your machine guns were always laid on your wire, on a final protective line. And your machine guns were dug in, but they had theirs dug in. But they had the top came down where they couldn't shoot more than 50 feet out in front of. Couldn't get a plus QE on the quarter elevation on their machine guns. I went down all of them. I said, you know what, this is ridiculous. And had a little hole to shoot out of it. Crazy. And I know I looked at it was awful. And I went back that night to Colonel Irwin's headquarters, and he asked me what I thought of it. I said, Colonel, you better get down on your knees and pray if they don't come through here. I said, because they'll just walk right on through. And if your troops won't even stay there, they'll run. And the problem was, is that your machine guns can't fire, your infantry troops aren't in proper positions, they have no relationship to your wire, what you have out there. And besides that, the American officers out there don't seem to know what they're doing. And he said, it wasn't that way when I was down there 2 weeks ago. I said, Colonel, I don't know what it was like 2 weeks ago. I know what it's like now. And the next day, of course, they worked through far over at our left, so it didn't make any difference. But I have always assumed that the Philippine Army was probably that way all along the front line. Now, talking about the Philippine Scouts, now before I got out of the hospital, they had been on the main highway into Bataan at Abukai, and the Japanese tried to break through there, and they just piled them up. I mean, they just gave them a real bloody nose, and the Japanese backed off, and they backed off and waited for reinforcements. In the meantime, they were withdrawn from the front line and put in reserve, and of course the Japanese were just looking for the Philippine Army to hit, and of course they had no problem once they hit the Philippine Army because they were running pretty fast. When they hit the front line and came through over on our left, of course, we were told to withdraw. And first we were told to withdraw to Lamai. Then we were told to withdraw to the Long River. And then we were told to go back. This was the night before, after the breakthrough, go back to Lamai. We were marching, counter-marching in there. And finally decided we'd go back to the Long River and establish another defensive position. Well, those positions, unfortunately, hadn't been prepared. And we got back there at about the break of day, and you couldn't, you put a Philippine Army soldier in position, go down and get another, and by the time you got back, he'd be gone. And of course, the Japanese were strafing and bombing, and it was confusion. And of course, we ultimately didn't have anybody on the line, but boiled down there. And I guess that was must have been the night of the 7th or 8th of April. And of course, we got the orders to surrender on April the 8th, and surrender on April 9th. Now, in the meantime, of course, basically what was going on in our area during the still a little bit of patrol action, not a whole lot. They weren't bothering us. We weren't bothering them very much. There was constant artillery battle going on overhead. We had quite a few 155s, and they kept the Japanese backed up pretty well. We didn't have any air power. They had the only airplanes flying. We had old Photo Joe, we called him, up in the air all the time watching every move. But the 155s were giving the Japanese a hard time at that point in time. And of course, they brought the airplanes in and then bombed the living hell out of it. Of course, we were dug in. But one instant I was telling about it. I was at the subsection headquarters, and Tommy Harrison, Lieutenant Artillery Lieutenant, who'd been watching the planes fly, big old bombers flying, telling us when they were dropping their bombs and so forth. And I finally said, Tom, you better watch that group of planes coming heading right for us. And he put his glass out. He said, no problem, didn't drop the bombs. About that time we heard him coming down. And about 4 of us hit the whole thing.